Alrighty, well, I think we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to our Elevate Digital webinar series, Reinventing Your PR Strategy Through Innovative Storytelling. Today, our webinar will be co-hosted by Elevate's Senior Communication Manager, Chloe Fitzgerald, and also Elevate's Digital Marketing Director, Bosco Anthony. Look, we can all say that in 2020, we've all had to adapt to a relatively disruptive business environment, and it's been quite a challenging landscape, especially when looking at a communication strategy and how many businesses had to pivot over the last 12 months. Just a quick few housekeeping things. Please just ensure to keep your mic on mute across the presentation, as well as cameras as well. We will have an opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the session, but if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, just pop them in the chat bot and I'll pass them on to the speakers as well. We will also be posting the webinar slide deck after the presentation, so if you do not receive them, please let us know and we'll send them through if you do need to jump out early. So a quick, just brief intro to our speakers. Bosco is the Digital Marketing Director at Elevate and has really focused on digital strategy and implementation across our client teams. He designs and executes digital marketing strategies, tactics and campaigns that help achieve that client growth, but also really builds a long-term strategy to be able to achieve some of those commercial milestones and objectives. Having roots in Tanzania and East Africa, Bosco has spent much of his time in Vancouver in Canada, but now has come across to Australia and has now been working with Elevate for the last few months. As a digital strategist, he has international experience leading a digital agency, but also extensive experience speaking and helping brands really grow and be able to achieve those objectives. Co-hosting, we do have Chloe Fitzgerald, and she is one of the senior communication managers at Elevate. Chloe is an all-rounder experience across digital and communication strategy that's really helping to achieve those tangible outcomes for our clients. As a creative and innovative communicator and thinker, she's got a keen interest in embracing new ways to distribute content, but also being able to really drive results, both the team across traditional media relations and newer forms of communication. Now I'm going to be passing over to our co-host to get started.
Well, thank you so much, Olivia. We're super excited to be here today. How's everyone doing today? We just want to make sure you can hear us. So if a few of you can just say that you can hear us, so type in the chat box, that'd be great. So we do know that you're there, and perfect.
Wonderful.
Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully everyone's having a lovely afternoon. And again, we're really excited to be here. Thank you, Olivia, for the most incredible introduction in my 350 speaking events. I have to say that's probably one of the best memorable ones I've had. So thank you again. And so Olivia is going to be keeping an eye on the chat. Feel free to ask as many questions as you like. And Olivia will, at the end of this session, start to shoot those questions our way for some Q&A as well. Our agenda is very simple. We've got a bit of storytelling to go over. We've got some landscape information, and then the amazing
case studies.
Yes, the amazing Chloe here will share some really strong case studies and client wins that we have at Elevate, and then we'll be able to answer and take any of your questions as well.
Wonderful. Let's get into it.
All right. So the first thing that we had was a little bit about our communication process and how we help you build your message and take your story to the market. And for the 5 really key areas that we would look at is, what is your message? And who are your stakeholders? And what's that unique selling proposition to your audience? What are some of the milestones? And what is your story? Now, Chloe, before we get into the details, out of those 5, what is probably the most important lens when it comes to storytelling today?
I've got to say messaging. You've got to have the basics of messaging right to be able to tell your story.
Right. So when it comes to messaging, we're talking about just brand messaging, or we're talking about the message we're taking to the market?
I mean, it's everything. It's all encompassing. It's your brand story. It's your unique positioning in the market, how you came to be, your values. It's any kind of touch point that you have with any kind of stakeholder. Having that messaging on point is just vital.
Right. I also think having a purpose and translating your purpose across your communication channels is so important today. When I think about brands like Apple and Nike, people that have spent years perfecting their craft, that purpose translates to all formats of communication. So I feel like this is so important before you even start your PR journey. So if you don't have this right, you've got a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Is that safe to
Exactly.
say? Okay, awesome. We are moving. Our next slide is about the age of storytelling. And so it's been an interesting year for most of us. And I would say that we've had to adapt. We've had to change how we tell our stories. And there's three real key areas that we have to consider when it comes to the age of storytelling today. We're living in a world right now where we have to be innovative. We have to think outside the box. So, you know, if you had an angle or a story that didn't really pick up, don't lose hope. Don't feel like it's the end of the world. You've just got to try different approaches, and you've got to come up with innovative ways to tell your story. And I'm really excited because Chloe's got some really cool case studies on how they had to be innovative to get their stories to the market. So for some of you that are struggling with getting your story to the media, don't lose hope. That's the first thing that we would like to talk about. The second thing is it's all about creating engagement to the audience, engagement to the people that are watching your message, and more importantly, engagement with everyone that reads this particular piece or watches this piece or acts. How do you want your audience to actually act after they've seen the piece of interaction? The best tip I've ever been given by one of my mentors is that when it comes to PR, everybody listens to their favorite radio channel, which is WIIFM. Do you know what that is? WIIFM stands for What's in It for Me. And that is the problem with PR, is if you're thinking about it from your lens, when you're thinking about it from features and benefits and service providers and discounts and codes, all of those things don't matter in a PR world. It's really about what's in it for your audience. So if you can flip the radio channel and go from what's in it for me to what's in it for us, I think you're going to hit the sweet spot. Would you agree?
I totally agree.
Finally, at this age of storytelling, we're moving to an age now that is more visual, more audible. And I would say the landscape, even in the last 20 years, has gone completely, shifted from print to digital and audible and publishers and just so many opportunities out there.
Yeah, and then even just in the last 12 months, seeing how the media landscape has changed post-COVID.
Yes.
It's just been incredible, and it's always transforming, always changing.
Right. So these are some of the key areas that we look at when it comes to storytelling. Now, let's get a little bit deeper and let's identify what are some of the critical elements that are so important when it comes to storytelling. The first one I feel like is the purpose of your campaign and the purpose of your story. What do you want the audience to get from this? Where would you like them to go? And what would you like them to do? Okay. So that's the first element that we need to look at. The next thing that we need to really understand is what is the sentiment of your story? Is it positive? Is it newsworthy? Is it shocking? Is it negative? There's so many different reactions, and in business, a positive or negative reaction is still a reaction. So understanding the crafting of your story is so important. I would say the third element is probably the most important in our world.
Definitely.
And that is preparing for your story. And that comes with making sure that you have the right people, making sure that you have the right messaging, making sure you have the right preparation to answer the questions if you're ever interviewed as well. And most people aren't ready for this.
No. And it's all about putting your best foot forward. And we'll touch on this a little bit later within the webinar today, making sure that you're as prepared as possible before you take that step and you start talking to the journalists. So you have all of your materials ready to go and you can put your best foot forward from day one.
And now the other thing as well is having a plan A and having a plan B.
Yes.
And maybe having a plan C, as we've learned in this industry. So distribution is also very important, and how do you complement other parts of messaging to go with this particular message as well. So if it's social media, if it's complementing through an email campaign, whether it's getting your message across different channels and avenues, and more importantly, what is the experience of the end user? How are they going to feel when they access your brand, whether they're reading it, whether they're preparing for it, or they're actually just watching it and they go look you up. Do you have the back of the house aligned with the front of the house? And this is so important when it comes to considering all the critical elements of storytelling. So let's talk a little bit about the landscape that we've had in the last few months. Yeah. 3 critical observations that we've had, and feel free to throw in the chat your observations as well. But Chloe's going to tell us a little bit about how the PR landscape has changed in the last few months.
I mean, it's been an absolute incredible transformation. I think the numbers are since January 2019, there's been 150 cuts to newsrooms, which is crazy. And for our point of view, that changes the way that we work in terms of the outlets that we're reaching to, the journalists that we're reaching out to. There's less of them, and the ones that are still in newsrooms are so time poor. You know, they're running from story to story. They've got a million different things going on at once, which really, I guess, touching on what we just said about making sure that we're prepared. We've got all of our ducks in a row, everything ready to pass on to them to make their lives as easy as possible. That's really what we're looking to do. But I think the biggest trend that we're seeing is that the media landscape is changing, it's shrinking, but it also is presenting some new opportunities, especially post-COVID. We saw a lot of themes come out where, you know, TV outlets are more open to interviewing their spokespeople via Zoom, which something that they wouldn't usually do. But that's now a new opportunity that's been presented, and we can get nice wins that way. Yeah, I think that's probably the...
Yeah, and I think also with the global events, I think everyone in the newsroom at the time, you know, timing was key, I would say, because everyone was focusing on different stories. Everybody was focusing on what's going on in the media. And sometimes we are really impacted by what's happening externally. And sometimes it's just about timing and getting the right time to get your message across. And sometimes the waiting game does help. I also think that, you know, with us as businesses as well, we were all disrupted. We're still trying to figure out what the new norm is. For any of you here that have had challenges on the PR side of things, whether it's trying to get your story out, feel free to drop it into the chat what some of your challenges are as well, because obviously we'd like to hear from you as well and see what some of the common themes as well. So if you are trying to get your story out there and you've had some challenges as well, feel free to throw that into your chat so we have a little bit of an idea of the landscape as well. So, you know, as much as we have challenges, there's always hope. And I feel like, you know, today's presentation will really cover some of those areas of hope that really exist. And in this particular time right now, we really have to come up with innovative ways to really pass through these challenges. And so public relations really is a holistic view of how we tell our story today. And I think, Chloe, you've got an example, I think, that you'd like us to share.
Yeah, this is just one that I wanted to share quickly with everyone, because it is very recent. It actually happened this week in King George Square with one of our clients, Act for Kids, who have launched Act for Kids Academy. And so really positive story that we had 7 and 9 come along and attend that one. So I just wanted to share, you know, there is hope, you know, PR still works. We're still getting cut through in outlets. And yeah, let's talk a little bit more about how we make that happen and the elements that are built into a PR campaign.
So let's dig a little deeper and let's see why this story got picked up. So I see here you've got a couple of backpacks on the right.
We do.
And obviously there's a message behind this.
There is. So thank you. Good question. So Act for Kids Academy is a new program that's being launched to businesses and corporates to allow them or enable them to understand or become more educated regarding child safety. And there's some crazy stats out there at the moment where I think it's 130 children across Australia are impacted by neglect and abuse each day. So when we were trying to come up with a campaign on how to get attention for this new program that was being launched, we were looking at those stats and we're just thinking, how do we visually show that in a powerful way? So through some partnerships through Act for Kids, we were donated these these backpacks from another not-for-profit called Little Star Kids, and we've managed to put them in a very public space in King George Square and visually show, you know, that's a pretty powerful message there. I think that there's 130 backpacks, and that represents the amount of kids that are impacted each day, and that's why this program is so vital. So
looking at this from the outside in, this is more an awareness campaign. You've got 130 backpacks that are there on display, and more importantly, it's telling a story, but it's not telling a story in a traditional way. We're using a statement to get the story out there. So sometimes you're looking at a story from one angle, and sometimes by getting yourself out of that angle, you could start to see multiple angles. So for those of you who are trying to pitch a story, and for those of you who have tried pitching a story and haven't had success, sometimes it's about just changing the lens and trying a different approach, right? And so I think this is a really creative way to make that statement.
Thinking outside the box, I guess.
Thinking outside the box, right? Yeah. So, okay, so we've got more stories coming through. So at Elevate, we work with our clients to build a strategy that's very holistic and really embodies marketing, communication, PR, as well as the digital side of things. And, you know, that's really how we can get innovative during these times where, you know, no one can really tell what the future is going to look like. But there's also other things that you've got to think about, and that is the longevity of your brand, the presence and the reach of your brand, how you apply innovative storytelling, and then building those performance metrics around that. And this comes with time. So the biggest takeaway from this particular strategy is you have to build a strategy that's adaptable, but at the same time has the long play out there as well. So, you know, one story might not work or an angle might not work, but then the next month you come up with a more creative story, or you come up with a different angle that might get you success. So when you're thinking about building a communication strategy, as much as it's unpredictable and it has to be adaptable, you have to think long-term.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I totally agree.
Okay. So let's talk about what makes the news. And I'm just going to have Chloe cover a little bit about this. So we've got about 8 different bullet points. Chloe, what are some of the things that really stand out for you?
So this is basics to PR. This is PR 101, all of the news angles that you need to consider when you are crafting your story. So if we start with the first one, the first newsworthy angle we're looking at is impact. So how big of a deal is your story? Does it impact a small amount of people, or does it impact, you know, does it have a national impact? That aspect will really determine as to whether it's of interest to your journalists, because the first thing they're thinking is this story going to matter to my writers, or is it not? If the answer is it's only going to matter to 3 people, you're probably less likely to get a run on that one than if it was something that was of national interest. Timeliness, and I think we use this quite creatively within our agency by leveraging key dates throughout the year. So this week is actually Children's Week, which tied into the Act for Kids Academy launch that we launched this week. So finding key dates or times throughout the year that you can really leverage and tie your story into those dates to apply this timeliness newsworthy hook to journalists. Novelty. So what about your story makes this unique? And I think we've done some really great examples of this in the past. And my favorite was we actually worked with a company who developed pet food. And they went on a search to find Australia's fittest chook. So this is a great example of a novel news article where we basically, it was a very successful campaign. We reached out to the public asking them to send in photos of their hottest chicks. And that was a campaign that got quite a bit of interest. So great example of novelty there. Proximity. So this is an angle or a newsworthy angle that matters to, I guess if we're pitching to a Queensland publication like the Courier Mail, they're going to be interested in our Queensland stats. So it's all about where you're located. Your local newspapers are obviously going to want to cover something within their region. So Wynnum Herald is going to want to cover activity that's going on within Wynnum. So that one's pretty self-explanatory in terms of proximity. We also have currency. So this one is all about common themes within the news and whether it's relevant to the times. So for example, with all of the impact of COVID at the beginning of the year, unemployment rates is quite a current angle that's being discussed in the news quite regularly. So having an angle that might tap into those unemployment figures or provide commentary for that agenda that is currently in the news is what we're talking about here with currency. Conflict, probably one that we like to try and stay away from in terms of when we are looking to get positive sentiment and positive PR stories for our clients, but various perspective always makes a good story. So journalists will often be hunting for conflict. And I guess that is where our reputation management services come in handy, where we control the messaging to kind of limit the conflict that's being covered there by the journalists. Interest, so what is the human sentiment? And this is your human interest stories. So is there an emotive narrative that's being discussed here? Is it going to make me want to say, oh, and, you know, feel very warm and fuzzies? And if so, it's hitting interest there. And prominence, this is talking about our celebs, our influencers, our people that have some quite significant reach. So any stories about them often do tend to become of interest to our media friendlies.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes you also have to remember that, you know, events that happen, whether news, what's happening around the world, can impact any of these areas as well. So it's always important to have a backup plan and also a long-term plan for all of these areas when it comes to making the news as well. So let's talk a little bit about the best practices when it comes to some of your best practices. And I know that having a spokesperson is important.
Yes.
What are some of the other areas that you feel are really important today?
I think this is really all about preparation. So the most important thing for us as PR professionals is being prepared. If we're looking firstly at our spokesperson, making sure that they are prepared for any interviews, they're available for any interviews. I think the most frustrating thing for a journalist is being pitched a cracker of a story, wanting to speak to the CEO, and the CEO is not around for a couple of days, so they're not able to cover it. So making sure we have a spokesperson, making sure they're clued up with our key messaging and able to talk to journalists as they need to. As well, I guess that leads us into our second PR strategy best practice, and that is brand. So being able to promote the brand when the opportunity does arise. So this is where your key messaging really comes in handy. And I think our media training services as well is when we tell our clients, when you're going through interviews, instead of saying, using a phrase like, we successfully launched this today, it's inserting your brand name there so that any grabs or, whether they be on radio or TV, there is that organic mention of your brand name within that grab. So I think that one's quite important. Something else that we do quite creatively here, because we have quite a few clients who have partnerships with not-for-profits and organizations, and we try to raise awareness of those partnerships within media. Any vision or any imagery that we send across to journalists, we try and include some branding within that imagery, whether it's, the main person in the photo is wearing a branded shirt, or we've done cupcakes in the past with a little logo on it. Just being really smart and really tactical about the way that you include your branding when you are communicating to media.
So I would say, out of these areas, is there anything right now that we should also be considering the best practices other than the 4 that you can see right now? Anything that comes to mind? I would say the other thing as well is making sure that your team or your company or your brand pages from a digital perspective is prepared to complement this as well.
100%,
if you are featured on, if you're featured on TV, you'd love to shout it off to the rooftops. You'd love to send an email campaign. You'd love to be on social media. And just getting everybody aligned together, because we're always playing the reactive game. We're always going, we've got something tomorrow. Let's have something ready. But imagine if you were proactive, and imagine if we plan for these sequences, even if they didn't happen, but at least plan for the sequences, a few days in advance or a week in advance. That would change the way we operate as well.
And you're 100% right on that. And I know this is something that you talk about a lot in terms of back of house, aligning that with the front of the house. When you are going out proactively with a media outreach campaign, making sure that all of your owned materials are tip top. So is your website, does that have the right key messaging on it? Is there somewhere to go, somewhere to send the audience to find out more information about the campaign?
Right. And so many times websites are, not in the right place or don't have the right messaging as well. So if you are going to get a lot of traffic, you're end up going, well, where did the traffic go? So we've talked about the do's of PR, and I'm sure in your history of being a PR extraordinaire, you have a bunch of areas that would be the don'ts of PR.
Yes.
Have you ever made a mistake or ever done one of these 4 critical errors?
I would not.
No,
not me, of course, no.
Okay.
But I will share my tips.
Yes.
So the don'ts of PR, I've got to say the biggest one that we tell our clients is nothing is off the record. So don't overshare, be friendly, have a conversation, but never tell anything to a journalist that you wouldn't want to see in print. That's probably my biggest tip in terms of don'ts of PR.
I think we say the same thing with social media. Don't post anything on social media you wouldn't want to see.
Exactly. And it's all the tips here are quite self-explanatory. So speak truthfully. Obviously, don't say anything that's not true or, could be uncovered further down the track and you could get yourself into strife that way. Don't repitch. And this is probably more for our friends in marketing and PR that are speaking directly to the journalist, is respect their time, respect the feedback that they give you. If a pitch didn't, or a company or a story wasn't of interest to them, don't keep pitching the same story to them. Come up with creative ideas, come up with other ways to solve the problem. But don't keep hitting with the same one that's clearly not working for a reason. I
think the other one that I can think of as well is don't make the conversation transactional. It's not about just getting your story out there. Sometimes you could even, if the journalist is willing to give you some time, ask them what are some of the stories that are of interest to them right now. What are they looking for? Or maybe if they have time to give you some guidelines on what's important to them. I think walking away from the relationship and building a relationship with someone is so important, because sometimes in business, we don't make that first hit right away or that first approval right away. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes people come back. People need a bit of touch points. Sometimes you just caught them at the wrong time. So walking away with a relationship is so important, in my opinion, if they're willing to give you that time as well.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, so we've got a roadmap that we put together, and then we're going to get into some case studies as well, some recent case studies. But looking at the roadmap, Chloe, what do you think will get people started, I guess?
Identification, crazy enough. So looking at, I guess, and this probably comes to the point that we've developed our story. So we want to know who are the appropriate media targets to be sending that story to. And specifically, we're talking to outlets here. And then we narrow that down a little bit further where we start looking at the specialty or the journalists within that media outlet. So if we're looking at the Courier Mail, we don't just send that one, if it's a business story, we don't send it to someone that writes about health. We obviously find the right business journo and also have a look at previous stories that he's been writing, or he or she has been writing in the last couple of months. Is it something of a similar nature? Can I actually use the previous stories that he's been writing in my pitch to kind of use that as an icebreaker to start talking with them? So really just knowing your outlets, knowing your journalists, and that's all about, I guess, knowing what's going on in your media landscape. Pitch. So this is often the tricky part. So finding the part of your story that's going to interest the journalist and hit that just right. And it's something that takes a lot of practice as well. There's a range of different ways that you can do this, and each PR professional, I think, has their own way that they like to reach out, whether it's via email or it's picking up the phone and having a little bit of a informal conversation.
I'm going to ask a question.
How do I do it?
How do you do it?
I do a little bit of both. So I've over my time in Elevate and in the PR world, I have developed some quite strong relationships with media and with journalists. So picking up the phone and picking their brains, even if the story's just at conceptual stage and we haven't even gotten down to the part where we're writing or we're distributing, picking their brains to see, would this work for you? What can I do to make it a little bit stronger? And then following up with the materials when we have it, and formalizing that outreach a little bit further down the track. So yeah, phone I think works best for me, but I have been known to text, to tweet, to LinkedIn.
You tried different things.
I have tried different things. So, and I'll actually touch on that after this slide, because there's a really cool...
We've got an interesting, cool concept here.
Yeah.
All right.
And then just for our... back one. So again, I think we've touched on this a little bit. So journalists are human to value their time, and it's all about the approach. So when I do say that I reach out to them by Twitter and LinkedIn, I still am respectful, making sure that you're valuing their time, trying to build that relationship with the people you engage with as well, because a lot of the time you will be talking to the same journos quite often. So making sure that you build a relationship that is sustainable. And then providing them with everything they need. There's that preparation again. So
that seems to be the recurring theme.
I know.
All right, so let's look at another case study, and this was an interesting one because you had to think outside the box.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this group and how did this happen?
Wonderful. So this is a client that we worked with who were based in the States and came to us because they wanted to increase their brand awareness in the Australian market. Really interesting company. They had some really cool technology for this particular campaign that I'm speaking about today. It is for their software Snagit. So it was a screen recording tool that would allow individuals and companies to basically do all weird and wonderful things quite easily on their screen. So recording it and making GIFs if they wanted to make operation or step-by-step documents. It was a fantastic tool there, and they did not pay me to say that. So anyway, so we had, they were launching the new version of their software, and tech journos are really hard to get a hold of. And so we wanted to find a way that we could reach out to specific journos that we have identified. But a lot of these journos are basically getting more than 100 emails a day. So how do we stand out? We were thinking about the software that they provide. And what we ended up doing is actually trying to connect with the journalist on LinkedIn. So sending them a little note on LinkedIn, but using the software to record our screen while we were doing it. And then would send that connection off. So there's one touch point with the journalist to try and get cut through that way. Mm-hmm. And then we followed up via email. And that email had the screen recording, or that was turned into a GIF. So we were showcasing how easy it is to use the technology and how great the technology was. But yeah, popping that into an email that showed us reaching out to them, showed the power of the technology, achieved cut through. And what we were actually able to do with that campaign is we got some pretty great coverage in the Australian Financial Review, which is a hard nut to crack.
I also want to talk about the fact that, the Australian Financial Review also has a digital aspect as well.
Yes.
So having this from a digital perspective, when you have a really high ranking digital publisher linking to your site or mentioning your website, that does so well for search engine optimization as well, because what Google or the search engines know is that, okay, this is a high ranking website that is linking back to this business or linking back to this website, which then automatically boost your ranking for different keywords as well. Sometimes the story will actually show up even higher than your own website.
Yep.
So it's really important to think about your PR strategy, not just from a print and radio and all these other avenues, but also from a digital publishing side of things, because that can also boost your organic rankings, which is an evergreen strategy long-term as well.
And I think there's two important notes to make off that. So one, what you're doing is you're securing third-party endorsement, which is telling other people how awesome you are, so you don't have to always do it yourself. And then the second thing to note there is by getting online coverage, it makes it so much more tangible for us as PR professionals to show return on investment and tangibly show how many people are coming back to your website after specific coverage, which is which has historically been a really hard thing for us to show, is to measure areas of success. So that online coverage does achieve that for you.
Now, there's so many different opportunities, and obviously at Elevate, we tackle and try to go for all of these opportunities as well. We've tried to label them into, I would say, 6 categories here. So Chloe, why don't you start off by letting us know a little bit about the ones on the left, and I could maybe touch on a little bit on the ones on the right as well.
Yeah, perfect. So what we have pulled together is just our media landscape that we're looking at for radio, TV, and long lead publications. And I guess the point that I wanted to make, and what we've been talking about internally, is how is best to chop up your story to make the biggest impact for these particular outlets. And so I just want to share a couple of quick tips with activity that we've been doing recently, and we've actually seen success with it this week. So for radio, what we do tend to do is do pre-records with our spokespeople, and just short 10-second audio grabs that we can send on to our friends at radio outlets, that they can then use in their news bulletins or in any grabs that they're looking to run. And that just, again, touches on that the people that we're working with in the media are so time poor. So by making things as easy as possible for them to just pick up our story, say "you beauty," and run it in the next day, that's perfect. So that's a little tip that we've been doing for radio that we have seen some great success in. TV as well. This is something that we have been in a similar fashion, just looking to shoot short interviews with our spokespeople. So sending a media kit that has, 5, 30-second, 10-second grabs that then can be sent on to TV outlets. So similar kind of thing if we're talking to Channel 7 or Channel 9. They can't send anyone along on the day, but they are interested in the story. Sending them a media kit that does have that Q&A and it has overlay as well, so they can just pick it up and run with it. That's perfect.
And also, I guess with TV as well, you've also got to look at it from what's happening around the world, what's happening, in Queensland, is there an election going on?
That's true.
and so all of that really impacts, your campaigns as well. Now, on the right-hand side, obviously, we've also got print, which is something that we all strive to get as well. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the online digital publishers and the owned and earned media. And I'm going to tell you a story. So if you don't know anything about me, in 2016, I was fortunate to do a TEDx talk in Vancouver, Canada. And one of the things that really changed the landscape for me as a speaker was being asked to speak for TEDx. But what really was interesting was the online media and what that created for my journey to bring me to Australia as well was the fact that I was being featured on various podcasts. I was being featured on various digital publishing outlets where I was being interviewed as well. And that was just as effective as all the other ways of media. It was effective for people contacting me for speaking requests, travel requests, workshop requests, and more importantly, it really just elevated my career. And it was something that I hadn't planned for, but it was something that exists. And it's a world that we're getting more and more evolved with. And so even podcasts today is another format of media. And it's something that's quite popular if you end up getting on a podcast that has a ton of listeners.
Yeah.
So engagement is something that we always look for. Followership is another thing that we look for as well. But even being featured in a private Facebook group, believe it or not, could do really big wonders for you, because if it's an engaged audience, it's still an audience. So identifying who your influences are is so important. And I think that's one thing that I was really impressed with Elevate is we have such a massive database of so many different opportunities. And it's not just one approach. It really is a holistic strategy to get your message out there. So here are some ideas to get you thinking about your stories and potentially getting more ideas. And Chloe's going to have so many more ideas with the case studies. But, the first thing is how is your business adapting? And how is it telling that story of adapting with all the current challenges? What are some of the trends that your brand or your message is all about? And what are some of the trends you're encountering? What are some of the activities that you're doing? And more importantly, what are some of the milestones within your business? These are some areas that we look at, but you look at the last few stories that have had attention, they've really come out from all different angles, haven't they?
Yeah. And I think it is chopping your story up for different audiences as well. So for many of the clients that we're working with, we're not just talking to one audience. We're not just talking to business publications. There's so many other audiences and so many other media outlets that we should be talking to. So for example, the Act for Kids Academy case study that we've already mentioned, although that's being launched to business media, we're also talking to parenting. We're also talking to consumer, retail, because we want to talk directly to the businesses who should be doing this training. So yeah, it's chopping it up and making sure that the story is ready to talk to those audiences. So we do often craft more than one versions of a campaign.
Right. And if you've tried one story and it didn't really do well,
Yeah.
I would say I challenge you to think outside the box and think of other avenues and try to have at least 6 or 7 other ideas, because it's almost like playing the lottery. You just don't know what they're going to pick up. So, you might as well be in it to win it.
I would love to know our hit rate, actually. That would be good stats. That'd be interesting.
All right. So we've got some examples here. We've got a bunch of examples here. So Chloe, why don't you take this away and give us some insights on some of the stories that really made the news recently.
Awesome. So I just really wanted to include some recent stories that we've been working with, and then some quick tips as to how we went about getting this coverage to start off with. So our 2 case studies here for Sunrise and Channel 7, both separate stories, but both the same tip. So the tip is to know your outlets and the segments that you're talking to. So a good example of this is Sunrise. So we are fortunate enough to work with our friends over at Q Super, who have some fantastic partnerships with not-for-profits and organizations, 2 of them being Juice TV and the Royal Flying Doctor Service. And recently we brought together the 2 organizations in Q Super. So one of the patients that work with Juice TV was, he's obsessed with planes, and we brought him over to the RFDS hangar to check out what they do over there, and wanted to bring media along to film that opportunity and use it as a good feel-good story. It wasn't quite right in its current format for Breakfast TV, but we do know that they have a Feel Good Friday section that runs every Friday that it would be perfect for. So when we were talking to the journalists about trying to get it over the line, our media team were able to talk to them and say, hey, wouldn't this be great for Feel Good Friday? And it clicked, and yes, that would work perfectly. And we secured that slot earlier in the month, and it was a fantastic piece that came to light. The other case study that we have here for Channel 7 was actually back in the early COVID days. I think it was back in March that this one came to be. We were working with the Coffee Club, who were delivering care kits to people in need, people stuck in social isolation, and they were using Uber Eats to deliver these care kits who had essentials. Like, you remember when there was that massive rush and we couldn't get any bread or any milk. So they were able to use this service to deliver that to people in need. So we pitched this one to a segment that was running on Channel 7 at the time called Acts of Kindness. So we knew exactly what we were looking to get. We knew the story would work there. So being able to talk to the journalists and know their outlet and know what segments they're running really just showed our media expertise. We know what we're talking about and got that story over the line. So that was another nice piece that came to be.
Yep.
And then this other case study is one from a client of ours called Australian Fundraising. And I just wanted to chuck this one in because to showcase the rise of Zoom on TV. So I know I mentioned this earlier, that it's becoming more and more acceptable to be able to run through interviews using Zoom, whereas historically they'd always want to send a cameraman in, which gets a little bit tricky for our friends that are located in regional areas that are a little bit trickier to get to. So this opportunity was great. It was actually leveraging National Cookie Dough Day, which who knew there was a thing, but there you go. So we created a creative campaign to run this Australian fundraising. They were working with some schools in WA, and we secured a nice piece on the Today Show there. So.
And it's interesting because all of these 3 different elements here have different approaches, different stories, different highlights, but more importantly, you almost have to think outside the box because you're not really sure what's going to get featured. So it's almost having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit more with some more case studies if we haven't overloaded with you with a few more. So here's a few more that Chloe, you'd like to share a little bit about.
Yeah, perfect. So I love you mentioning plan A, plan B there. And I might start on this one that's in the center there for Culture Kings. So that was a campaign that we really stood back and looked at what we were working with, the assets that we had. For this one, we pivoted and were able to really hone in on the presence that Culture Kings had based on the Gold Coast. And because of that proximity and because of the way that campaign came to be, we were able to secure a really lovely front page on the Gold Coast Bulletin just by leveraging the brand story, because they were originally launched on the Gold Coast. And yeah, that's how that one came to be.
Let's talk a little bit about the Q Super pivot here as well.
Yes, wonderful. So this one, I guess, is really about knowing what's running in the media, what's topical. So again, our friends at Q Super had a great partnership with an organization supporting the Premier's Reading Challenge. So we were working with them to raise awareness for a top 5 book challenge that they were running. The journalist was a little bit warm on it, wasn't exactly getting over the line, and that's when we started brainstorming some additional campaign opportunities over the phone to them, and was just having a conversation about how the teacher librarian had noticed that kids were reading more, but not only that, they were reading more classics.
Right.
And that really piqued her interest. She then became really keen on the story. She wanted to talk to our teacher librarian. She really wanted to highlight the program. So that is a great example of being able to pivot, knowing what's running in the media at the moment, what the journalists would be interested in, and then, pitching that over the phone. So that is that great example of, plan A didn't work, so let's look at plan B and plan C.
And I see there's one here on relationships. I'm big on relationships.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how this came to fold.
So at the end of the day, I really think that PR just comes down to relationships, whether it's relationships with your clients, whether it's relationships with journalists, whether it's relationships with your team. But this particular example, so it's another AFR piece that came to be, there wasn't a particular angle, or there wasn't a particular news agenda that we were trying to push. We were working with a really innovative company, and we knew that getting the journalists to have a conversation with the CEO, who was so forward-thinking, who was so innovative, who did have a range of different subjects that he could provide industry commentary on, they'd be able to make magic if we just got them in the same room. And that's what we ended up doing. We introduced the journalist over the AFR to our contact and gave a list of everything that he could talk to, all of the trends, basically how much of a genius he was. And from that conversation, it was a phone conversation that ended up happening. We were able to secure this piece, which was really a thought leadership piece for the company. So great result there.
All right, so it's a pretty big landscape for you to choose from, but I think the lesson here is when it comes to building a reputation, there's 2 really key areas that you want to look at. You want to look at the experience, you want to look at the reputation, and those are the 2 critical factors that bring to influence. But if you want to dig a little deeper, we've got to look at the trust value, the storytelling, the collaboration, the speed, the delivery, the experience, the authority of the space that you're in. And all of these elements really create that attraction value. And so being a person that's looking to get your message out there with your brand, you really have to ask yourself, what are some of the areas there that you're doing really well? What are some of the areas that you could improve? And more importantly, how could you take stories from those frontline areas and take to the market? And I think of a story here of a nursing, in the US, there was a franchise called Nurse Next Door. And they were really trying to get their brand out there when they were first building out their franchising in Canada as well. And they came up with this storytelling element, which was all about humble pie. And it was a story about how every time the brand made a mistake or someone on the front lines made a mistake, they would actually send the customer a piece of humble pie. And it basically was fresh. It came in with a little note that said, you know, we didn't really do well this time, but we promised that we'll do better. And that story got picked up by CNN, and within a few months, that story just got elevated into something that was bigger than what it was. And so if you think about all these different brands out there, sometimes the stories lie within you or your people. It's about digging a little bit deeper. So the biggest takeaway we can give today is necessity is the mother of invention.
But you love your quotes.
I do love my quotes. I do love my quotes. And I think that, you know, we really have to think about thinking outside the box. And at Elevate, we love thinking outside the box. And so, you know, we encourage you to follow up with us as well, and you know, email us or contact us. And we ourselves have had to evolve as well at Elevate. But, you know, some of the things that we look at is, how is your brand digitally transformed? Because we are living in this age right now where digital transformation is still top of mind. How creative have you been? And more importantly, how well are you embracing growth? And at Elevate, we've had to go through all of these areas. We've had to, and Chloe, you've seen this throughout the year. These three areas have probably been the pillars of change for Elevate in the last few months as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're not unlike our clients in that we did, you know, have to get used to remote working, and that's just not working with each other as a team, but it also changed the way that we work with our clients. So instead of having face-to-face meetings, we were, you know, doing Zoom, and then how does that impact the way that we talk to the media as well? Yeah. So yeah, it's been an interesting year, to say the least.
Right. So, you know, if you're going through change and you're looking to adapt, you're looking to evolve your strategy, your PR, comms, or digital strategy as well, you know, we'd really encourage you to contact us. We're going to take some quick questions as well, but this is our contact information. So you've got Chloe's email or mine. If you're on the call today as well, feel free to send us a message as well, and we'd love to try to help you as best as we can. Olivia is going to come back on the webinar just to see if there's any more questions that we could go through, and you know, let's see if we can take a quick question. So we listened this morning to a prediction made in 1984 that with the launch of communication satellite, people in the future will communicate, not will communicate. This is a great comment from our friend Lewis that said he listened to this morning to a prediction made in 1964 that with the launch of a communication satellite, people in the future will communicate, not commute. Why don't we use Zoom more than TV crews running around to cover off on news stories? That way we can engage people all over the globe. That is a great comment. And I think I watch the project almost every night, and I would say that in the last few months, I've seen more and more interviews on the project via Zoom, whether it's celebrities, whether it's people that are being interviewed. I think even the media outlets have had to adapt and embrace Zoom. So that's a really great point from our friend Lewis as well, where, you know, that prediction is really true, that we've had to adapt. And I think you know, no one knows where this is going, but maybe we all will be commuting less and working from home as well. We've got a question here from Jeremy. What's the first question you asked when figuring out if a story is newsworthy or not? How do you try to make it more newsworthy? That's a good one.
That is a good one. I mean, if we're talking PR 101, we look back to our newsworthy angles. So looking what about that story makes it timely or makes it novel, or, you know, looking at proximity as well. So really stripping it back and looking at those newsworthy angles and trying to make it fit. And asking more questions of the client as well, because a lot of the time they do have those little nuggets or little things that are happening in the background that they think is just their day-to-day and won't be of interest to the rest of the world. But a lot of the time, there are those nuggets that that media will run with. So yeah, great question, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, I go back to what's in it for them, going back to the favorite radio channel, what's in it for us, what's in it for the group, what's in it for the audience. So I would say, Jeremy, the angle that I would look at, or the first question is, why is this newsworthy? And what are people going to take away from this? And sometimes it might be a really great story, but you might just got the wrong timing, or there's something going on in the world that's taken precedence as well. So, sometimes it's about saving those ideas as well and going back into the box and using them a couple of months later as well. I think, when it comes to media campaigns as well, I think, we've got so many going on, but yesterday we had a very successful media campaign as well. So do you want to share a little bit about it as well?
Yeah, well, I think this week's actually been an interesting week for media, because there's so much going on in the world at the moment. We've got the US election, which is taking place at,
we had a weather storm in Queensland.
Yeah. Right? We've also got the Queensland election coming up. So you are competing with so many unknowns, and a lot of the time we do have media, we might have a media launch like the Advocates Academy launch. We didn't know whether anyone was coming along to it. The last thing we know is when we're talking to our TV news is, it's in the diary, but it depends on whether a cyclone comes along or whether there's a politician that's making a media launch in the same day. So I guess in the industry that we work in, there is so much unpredictability as well. And so it's being able to leverage your campaign when you can to safeguard against the unpredictable nature.
Yeah, and you know what, we've shared some success stories, but for every success story, there's also a lot of trial, and there's also a lot of stories that don't make the media as well. And we, that's part of what this industry is all about. But I'd encourage you not to lose hope. I'd encourage you not to give up, because you may have something amazing that you believe in and the world would really adapt to. And sometimes we're just waiting for that right opportunity. So thinking long-term, having a long play, coming up with multiple ideas and going back to the drawing board and going, right, what worked, what didn't work, and let's try to craft a new message. Those are all part of the experiences of getting the story out there. And so, I think, Chloe, you'd be able to attest to this, that, yes, we get stories out there, but we also sometimes struggle because, the timing might just not be right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about playing the long game. We have time for one more question.
You're going to love this last question from Jeremy.
Yeah. So Jeremy, you're on fire today with a lot of great questions. Can a media campaign stand alone, or do you think it's best used in tandem with other marketing and comms activity? That's a good question. That's a loaded question, Jeremy. All right. Well, do you want to take this first?
I thought for sure you would have jumped on top of that.
I would say ladies first.
I think that to leverage your brand best, it needs to be a collaboration across all your channels. So you need to have your earned channels, your paid channels, and your owned channels all talking to each other, all feeding into the one campaign messaging. And at Elevate, we call that the sweet spot, is when all three of them all work together. It's beautiful. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And look, I think when one door closes or one avenue doesn't work, it's always good to try to jump in through the window or the side door, as I like to say. I'm full of analogies today. But I would say, it's really important for us to think about a holistic campaign as well moving forward. So I think we've come to the end of our webinar today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us either on LinkedIn or an email or phone or text. We'd like to thank everybody for attending. And we'd love to hear from you as well. So please send us a message. And again, thank you so much for attending today and sharing your afternoon with us. Looks like there's some stormy clouds coming out. Be safe wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.